Good afternoon, everybody. We apologize for the late start. My name is Jonathan Gless. I'm with you by voice. Unfortunately, my system wouldn't let me into the room entirely, but I can promise you I'm here with my colleagues 100%. I have the good fortune of moderating this last panel discussion of the summit, which is entitled Creative Economy Policy Making and the Future. Before we get into the discussion, I'd like to thank a few people. The team at Westaff for its continued commitment to research and data collection and analysis for creative industries, and for hosting this summit, and in particular, David Holland and Randy Engstrom for their leadership on the summit. I also want to do a special shout out to the IT team for keeping us all going. Today's session has been collectively focused on the future of the creative economy in the context of a world that is rapidly changed due to a global pandemic. In truth, the pandemic has simply revealed and exacerbated what was already apparent and what we already knew. We've seen a widening wealth gap in the world's richest countries that began decades ago, but escalated after the Great Recession. The environmental crisis is upon us and can no longer be denied, and the call for social and racial justice is paramount in all policy decisions, both immediate and long-term. The systems and networks that served us in the 20th and early 20th century just simply no longer work. Tax-based industry silos, gaps in creative training versus real-time need, the role of design and technology and community building and creating more inclusive workforce training and economic development are all being re-examined every day. In short, everything from institutions to systems are now on the table for reconsideration. With that, we've invited an extraordinary group of thought leaders, educators, and policy advocates together today to discuss the future of the creative economy, the role of creatives, and the potential for creative policy to address our once-in-a-generation challenges. We'll start the conversation with each panelist addressing this moment in time from his or her perspective. To move through these initial comments, we've asked our panelists to hold questions and comments of each other until after initial presentations. At that time, we'll open the conversation to all panelists and audience. Please feel free to put your name and affiliation in the chat, and any comments or questions you may have. We'll be monitoring the chat room throughout the entire conversation, and we'll elevate all of your questions during Q&A. I hope that sounds good. And with that, let's get to it. We're going to start with a global perspective. We're honored and delighted to have Edna DeSantos Duesenberg with us today. Edna is an economist and international consultant on creative economy who's based in Geneva. A native of Brazil, Edna wrote what is considered one of the foundational studies of the creative economy, has worked extensively with the United Nations, and serves on panels across the world. Edna, we're delighted you're here and welcome to the conversation.
Thank you so much for this. Thank you so much for these kind words. And I should say I'm delighted to be part of this panel and to be involved in this conversation that we think we are taking shape and looking from different perspectives. But I have been following also the whole conference, and I have been learning a lot about not only the theory of the creative economy, but the practice and what are the challenges ahead. So I prepare a PowerPoint that I would like that will be okay. So I thought that we have to think in terms of the creative economy from now on. No? So I thought it was important to see the creative economy in the 2020s. What happens in the 2020? What we are facing. So please, the next slide, please. So I think what we really have, we have a new reality, we have shifts everywhere, and we have a new narratives. Because undoubtedly, this new decade was marked by irreversible disruptions. The society was already undergoing a deep transformation in all fronts. But of course, the magnitude of the pandemic took the society by surprise. So when the pandemic, governmental policies have to be revisited. So of course, healthcare culture was not a top priority in the agenda of governments, but suddenly we had to reassess. And I think in this context, there was a very big shift also in terms of behavior, just our behavior. And then I think gradually we are moving from a kind of a consumerist approach to a more humanistic approach. So suddenly a human-centered and inclusive approach became imperative. And this was happening everywhere. So I think over this time that society had been confined, we had to rediscover and to rethink our real ethical values and principles. And I think, in my view, one of the biggest, if you can call, legacy of this pandemic is that solidarity has been expressed and the sense of citizenship was manifested everywhere. And suddenly, health and well-being really became the essence of our goals. So it was very interesting that in the turn of the century, we are back to a kind of economic theory of 1 century before. So there is no wealth but life, because this became the real priority. So next slide, please. And in this context, I think governments have to address a number of policy challenges. And I think there is a lot of things on the table at the same time, because you can deal with structural, technological, social, cultural, and behavioral change. And in the moment that the world economy is struggling to resume growth after the pandemic, and what we can see is that the governments are highly indebted, as well as most of the public sector. And there are some strategic alliances between governments and the market, governments and financial, because we need to really push the economy again. So these big challenges, of course, we could see that we have already a problem of unemployment, but the rise of unemployment became a reality. We have a home office that make a big change, distance learning, the whole structure of the future of jobs that we could listen in the previous panel. So I think there was very apparent big imbalances and big asymmetries. So inequality became more visible, and social instability. And apart from that, you have all the geopolitical changes, climate change, migration, transition towards a creative and green economy. So I think we really have a very big agenda on the table. Next, please. And in this context, I think the governance, because this sanitary crisis affected global governance, affected free trade, affected tourism. So governments, they had to implement rescue plans for business and aid packages for individuals. But I think that in this context also, the private sector, it's much more engaged with social innovation and environment. Enterprises became much more committed with the socioeconomic impact of their activities locally. I think that the nonprofit organizations and civil society has really been mobilized and joined forces for a number of collaborative actions. And I think was also important, we could see the revival of communities and local business through the creative economy. So I think there is more social engagement and advocacy, and this is really promoting social change. Next, please. And in this context, I think there is a very close relationship between free time, leisure, and culture and well-being. And during this very long period of lockdown and social distance, we could see that we have more free time, but we have very limited leisure options. So we spend a lot of time at home, surfing in the net, reading books, listening to music, playing video games. So I think it really demonstrates how important culture and creativity is, that could help us, was an ally in this very difficult moment. But I think that today, all of us, we are emotionally fragile, and we have to overcome a number of problems. We have to overcome solitude. We have to overcome losses that will persist even after the pandemic, if the pandemic will finish. But I think that when you think large, the COVID has not only taken away lives, but also our joy, our freedom. So I think it's in this context that policies to boost resilience and well-being will be needed in the post-crisis. So I see a very strong role for governments to play a role in these questions, because our priorities also have changed. So the next, please. And I think it's really in this context that culture, creativity, and connectivity really became the backbone of the society, because was what helped us to really face this very long-lasting period. But what we see today is that we see key sectors like tourism, culture, and creative economy were severely affected, but now they are trying to join forces to preserve some jobs and prepare for the post-crisis. And I think the culture and the creative sectors had to reinvent themselves and had to adapt for survival. Because we all know they were one of the first to stop and the last to restart. But in this context of so many difficulties, I think paradoxically, online cultural consumption and creative production escalated. And some creative entrepreneurs were able to fast respond and grasp opportunities. We could see that in the case of music, for instance. Last year, there was a music market is being 7.5% higher as compared with the previous year. And from this, 55% is streaming. So this shows how the creative sector was able to innovate and to adapt very fast. We could see that the consumption of video games, e-books, we could see virtual film festivals, online actions for visual arts, fashion and food home delivery. So I think what we could see is that there are new audiences, new products, new formats, as well as new opportunities. and the next. And to conclude this initial reflections, I think we are really resetting our mindsets, our lifestyle, and shaping the future. And after nearly 2 years of pandemic, we're obliged to handle this new reality. And but the crisis is always a catalyst of change, and the creative economy is powerful and can lead this recovery process. So no doubt that there are few winners and many losers, but in my view, the creative economy is emerging stronger. Why? Because I think, first of all, there are greater political recognition of the importance of the creative economy for the contemporary society. And it became really a priority in terms of local policies, national policies, global policies. And I think there is a lot of changes that will help governments to rethink creative economy policies. In particular, we have to redefine urban life. We have to see how this new ecosystem is evolving. And this will require that cross-governmental decisions. We need a citizen-centered approach, a cross-sectoral collaboration, open politics. So the impact investment funds are now available, digitalization, skills, collabs. So I think the bigger question has changed a lot, because before we were looking how to finance. Now we have to think how to put in place good projects that will give very concrete results. And it is in this sense that I think the big challenge is to rebound better and use our creativity to transform the world. And everybody has a role to play. And I think in particular that this year is the International Year of the Creative Economy for Sustainable Development. So it's really a timely opportunity to foster policies, projects, and actions. So this is what I would like to share in this initiative. Thank you.
Edna, thank you so much. That beautifully lays out the conversation that we can build on for the next hour. We could actually unpack your few minutes of conversation over the next few days. Thank you for that. Srini, I'd like to turn it over to you. Srini, excuse me. Srinivasan is president of Montreal-based World Design Organization, and until recently was also CEO of Luminium industrial design firm in Silicon Valley. Srini, I'll turn it over to you.
To be with you today. Good afternoon to all the attendees. So we have a small presentation, so I would like to start the presentation. World Design Organization is the only global design promotion agency today that connects design professionals, design educators, professional entities, corporations, and municipalities from over 40 countries. Together, we set the trends and host activities on topics with global appeal and urgency, such as sustainability, social innovation, and better quality of life. This we do by influencing the cities to create better policies for their economic development and welfare of its citizens. The next slide, please. Today, we have 185 plus members. Through these 185 members, so we are almost 400,000 people are connected, designers are connected. So you and me as individuals cannot become members, only organizations can become members. Therefore, our number shows only 185, but through these 185, we connect almost 400,000 designers across the globe. Next slide, please. We strive to create a world where the design enhances the economic, social, cultural, and environmental quality of life through a set of programs that we have been doing for almost 60 years now. The next slide, please. So these are some of the programs that people are familiar. So one of the topmost programs that we do and we're very proud of is the World Design Capital, where we choose a city that has the passion through the lens of design. They're able to create a better life for its citizens. This includes economic development, investment, job opportunities, and also in the last 5 years, we have brought in the UN sustainability goals, the 17 goals that are there, which is they're hoping by 2030 to create a better world. So these programs, they are by themselves very, very big programs. You can go to our website to take a look at more details because we have very short time here. The next slide, please. So we are all about people. Most of our work is surrounding people and communities, their requirements, and the knowledge or the insight that we gain through our collective global platform. So that's what we bring together, and we design programs that address the specific needs of each and every community from across the globe and share the knowledge on this international platform so that one can learn from the others to create a better world. That's our motto, to create a better world. Next slide, please. These are some examples that we have been working with different parts of the world. So we have what we known as the World Design Impact Prize, where we identify a solution. This is not the general design awards that we give for the beauty and the effectiveness of a design, but this is for the effectiveness of a solution in a society, what impact it has created. So these are some of the past winners of our prize. As you can see, this is BioLite, is a stove. The second one is of interest, where in the developing countries, the new syringe, 67% of the new syringes are already infected. So if you go to a hospital, you're likely to come back with a disease that you did not have. So therefore, this was one of those syringes that was developed by a UK-based university, where if you take the new syringe and peel it off, if it turns red, don't use it. If it is green, then you can use it. So quickly we can do a test. So similarly, there are more and more. So you can look at our website, since I intend to finish in 5 minutes. And the other ones are, the better helmet, and the last flow. The second one is called Flow. This is for the developing countries. Women, they want to wash and reuse the sanitary napkins where they cannot afford the modern methods of go and buying. Plus also it helps in sustainability. We don't want to throw things into the earth. And the next one is the Vodka water, also based in Africa. Next slide. When we all were hit with the pandemic in February of 2020, WDO quickly turned ourselves into a digital platform where we, with the IBM and DFA, we created an awareness program. The people did not know how to deal with COVID-19. At that time, it was still raw and still fresh. So we created a global challenge, everything online. And we had, for our call, we had 6,000 people volunteering for that particular project. And we had chosen about 300 people from 33 countries. And it was a 2-week design activity, everything online. And at the end of the activity, we gave all the IP that was created as a public domain so people can take it and use it in their micro community. The whole idea was to let people find the solutions that will make their lives better. And then we moved on to, with the UN Women, as part of the COVID-19 challenges, it was come up to the limelight that women and children are facing more violence than before because suddenly everybody's in the same house for 24 hours. So therefore, with the UN Women unit in the Asia Pacific region, Bangkok, and other countries, so we created yet another design challenge, 15 days, And we had another huge, team of, 200, 300, 200, 225 people from 30 countries. We came with the possibilities of how to reduce solutions. All of these are on our website. Again, all these solutions are on the public domain. You can take it and use it.
Thank you.
And the third one is design in space for use on Earth. So why is design in space relevant? Because if you look at some of the body parts, like for example, if you're going to create a retina, if you're going to manufacture it in a zero or near zero gravity, the thickness is much, much thinner than what you can produce on Earth. So therefore, it became very relevant what design can do to better people's lives. And the last one is the World Packaging Organization. We did another challenge where we, because during the pandemic, we also saw everybody's taking food home. Every day there's more packaging. Every day there's more wastage of material. So we created some solution which can save the Mother Earth from getting dumped with a lot of things that we do not. So these are some of the things we quickly adopted. As I said, we are for creating a better economy and also for better social development. And that's what World Design Organization is all about. And again, I'm very, very thankful for being part of this panel today. Thank you.
Srini, thank you so much, and congratulations on all the good work of the WDO. I hope we can dig into how the WDO has evolved its idea of design and community when we get into conversation later.
Yes, Jonathan.
Karen, would love to hear from you. Excuse me. Karen Hoffman is the provost at the Art Center College of Design in Pasadena, where they're rethinking the role of design and designers in meeting today's challenges. Higher education across the world is rethinking what it means to prepare students for the future. Karen, welcome to the conversation.
Thank you, and I'm so happy to be here. Hello to our audience, and it's been an honor to be on the same platform with the rest of the panelists here. So I'll jump right in, and I also too have some visuals to provide a little context if you can bring that up. So I have been engaged at Art Center in this role of provost, overseeing all of education during this pandemic, and as Edna says, these new realities, and a time of massive change, in particular for higher education, is one of those sectors that is going through tremendous change, and rightfully so. It's time that we reckon with who our audiences are, who our students are, who our faculty are. Our main focus now is around these four areas, and everything else is below these priorities. So really, like many other organizations, we're really trying to understand how we as creators can really prepare students to understand issues around diversity, equity, inclusion, to provide an environment for learning with those tenets at hand. The crisis that we're in environmentally on top of this pandemic certainly is something that we've been paying attention to for a while, with issues of sustainability and the circular economy. However, which just came out of the UN reports recently, is quite devastating, and we have to take this seriously as makers. Having students from all over the world, Art Center is located, we have in Pasadena, just outside of Los Angeles. We're privileged to be in the facilities that we have, but really we know that we are elite. We do have a very high tuition, and we are addressing that. And what we are trying to do is create new models of engagement to get, a whole set of voices that need to be at the table as what artists and designers do in the future is vital to economic development. Next slide, please. With that, this is our current disciplines that we have at Art Center. We're very proud of this. It's been 90 plus years. Institution is very much based on Bauhaus principles. We kind of look at ourselves as a collective of different majors, but we all work together in unique ways, have our depth and breadth of skill sets. And one thing that really does make Art Center a bit unique is these are the only disciplines that we have, and we're very connected to the industry. And so we have a lot of industry-oriented projects and alumni that come back and offer up projects and internships and such. So, we are at a point too globally. We are fortunate to have a satellite in Berlin. We've done lots of projects in Asia and South America, and partnerships like INSEAD, which is one of the best MBA schools in the world, so that our students are able to understand other languages outside of art and design, like business. Next slide. Our mission statement is really about setting the future, giving a trajectory for our students to not just have great creative skills, technical skills, but really use those skills to influence change. And so Learn to Create, Influence Change is our mission. And this means that it's, again, a lot more than just what you would typically think an art and design education is. It's addressing the issues at hand that our world needs this generation to pay attention to. Next slide. And we're very fortunate to be in a creative capital, a little different than the WDO in this, but this is being in the Los Angeles metro area, we are very fortunate to be in the middle of a lot of great industries. And it's our responsibility, quite frankly, to engage in this economy and not just be in our own bubble, but really take advantage of what is around us, so our students can actually engage in real world practice on a local scale as well. Next slide. And one of the things I'm most proud of, we're celebrating our 20th anniversary of our Design Matters program. It's all around social impact. The 4 themes that we really have been focusing in on over the last 20 years are around sustainable development, public policy, global healthcare, social entrepreneurship. And we have been fortunate to be part of having NGO status of the United Nations. And so that's something we know we're privileged to be a part of, but also want to take advantage of how we can move the conversation forward where it does need to be moved. The next 5th tenet there is going to be all around social justice. We've been doing a lot of projects for all the obvious reasons around social justice these last couple of years. But this does require a different kind of relationship. This means that we're asking a lot of our corporate partners, a lot of our other nonprofit partners to move into the future with us on these things. And we can't do it alone. Designers and artists cannot do these things alone. Next slide. And so really, our future is a little bit different than I think what most people think an art and design school is all about. We really do have this responsibility to train students in these ways, to prepare them to engage in their world as a creative citizen. And that means they need to know very different languages. This one in particular that I'm happy our panel has been discussing is around economic development. How could we get creatives involved in politics? How can we get these young artists and designers to think about running for a mayor or governor position, or getting involved in local, state, federal, global politics? Those are the conversations that we're really happy to be having. And then the final slide, and ironically, Edna, I think your slide was all about resetting. And it is, we're all about the right? Our world has been turned upside down and we're never going back. So what do we do with this new lens? These are the words that my team has been repeating again and again and again the last 18 months, is these words of, really rethinking everything that we're doing, really reprioritizing all that we're doing as far as offering an art design education. It's brought up new opportunities for partnerships, new kinds of models. We're looking at things outside of our degree granting programs, because now is the time to reinvent. And great partnerships locally. We're very blessed to sort of, again, reprioritize where we want to be, which is part of the LA community. And we're getting involved with programs like LA Optimize, the LA Economic Development group we're part of, and unique groups like Valence, which is really about connecting professional a community of creators of color. And so we're excited to be part of the conversation, and certainly today, happy to be joining the stage with you all. Thank you.
Karen, thank you so much. Congratulations on all of the amazing work coming out of the Art Center. I know many of you on the panel have been attending much of the summit. Karen, you were at the last session where there was a conversation about creative workers and the challenges of being a creative worker anywhere in the world right now, but in particular in the United States, where our economy really is not built to support gig workers or individual workers. So from that perspective, we're delighted to have with us today Kim Tignor. And Kim, I have to say, I'm not sure if your last name is Tignor or Tignor, so I'm going to be corrected by the end of the panel.
Tignor. It's
Tignor.
very, very phonetically friendly.
Oh, good. All right, thank you. Kim is Executive Director at the Institute for Intellectual Property and Social Justice at Georgetown University. And prior to that, she was Director of Public Policy at the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights. She works at the intersection of intellectual property, mainly in creative industries, and racial and social justice. Kim, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. And just a quick correction. I went to Georgetown Law, but IPSJ, we are with Howard University Law School. So two great DC institutions, but I just wanted to make sure that we gave HU their shout out too.
Absolutely, thank you for that.
So, as I prepared for today's discussion, I went through one of my favorite mental exercises where I aspired to write a definition for the term creative economy. One that was so complete and so exact that it placed the term and all the activities around it into one beautiful, rigid box. And once again, I failed at that exercise, right? Because the fact of the matter is that human ingenuity can be at the source of any economic activity, and that the creative economy is an evolving concept based on creative assets with the potential to generate economic and cultural growth and development. It comprises a diverse set of knowledge-based economic and cultural activities ranging from activism to architecture. As such, the creative economy lies at the intersection of human creativity, culture, knowledge, and I dare say, intellectual property policy. Cultural and creative industries contributed to around 3% of global GDP and created employment opportunities for 29.5 million people in 2013. The World Intellectual Property Organization, WIPO, estimates that the copyright industry is intrinsically linked with creative industries, contributed over 5% to global GDP and generated 4 to 7% of national employment. And while we do not have yet a complete picture on the pandemic's impact on creative and cultural industries, prior to the coronavirus crisis, this sector was one of the fastest growing in every region of the world. Exports of creative goods and services grew at an average annual rate of 7.3% between 2003 and 2015, outpacing growth of many other industries. The creative economy is one of our most important assets in economic terms, of course, but also much more than that. Its contribution to our well-being is invaluable. This past year was a testament to how culture helps us cope with the challenges we face in life. From our outrage response to the murder of George Floyd, to the loneliness and fear brought about by a global pandemic, cultural and creative works created a safe space for us to hurt and heal. So now through thoughtful and intentional policy, we must in turn create a space for creative and cultural works to thrive and grow, which is why I'm especially grateful for the thought leadership on this panel. You've probably already caught me. Well, luckily you couldn't see me on screen because of the presentations and PowerPoints, but I've been taking lots of notes because Our strategy to rising to this challenge will have to be a holistic one. From access to quality healthcare to impediments to economic stability, these challenges impact creators in a unique and disparate way. And I would like to offer up intellectual property and tech policy as one aspect of the solution we're discussing today. At the Institute for Intellectual Property and Social Justice, we are especially concerned with how systemic issues rooted in race and socioeconomic status impede creators working from the margins. Our strategy is creator-focused and creator-informed. It is powered by community outreach, education, advocacy, and storytelling. We work on issues ranging from the need to empower our creators through IP education to how to employ equitable infrastructure development. The creative and cultural industries derive a growing percentage of their revenue from the digital marketplace, movement that was only accelerated by the coronavirus. Problems such as access to reliable internet, outdated copyright and related enforcement laws inhibit the growth of these industries in the United States and abroad. Effective laws, improved enforcement, and inclusive market access promote and foster the growth of the creative industries throughout the world for the benefit of society, as well as the creators, producers, and distributors of creative works. Take, for example, the CASE Act, legislation to bring more power to the hands of creators to protect their work. And though it had been making its way through the legislative process long before the pandemic, its passing as part of the COVID relief bill felt really timely. It essentially created a more accessible mechanism for creators to represent themselves when they feel their creative rights have been infringed upon. But what good is a tool like this if it does not reach the actual hands of our creators? How are we educating our creators on the tools now available to them? How are we being especially targeted in our empowerment efforts when it comes to those that are creating from the margins? And this is just one example of the legislative solutions being considered or enacted that require intentional and direct strategies for reaching creators, especially those creating within under-resourced and underrepresented communities. This is an important and critical moment. This pandemic has forced our creators to reevaluate the economic viability of their chosen craft. And it is now upon us to care for them and protect our creators just as they cared for us and inspired us this past year. I'm really excited about this conversation.
Kim, thank you. Your closing comment was really beautiful, that the creatives took care of us and now we have to take care of them. Thank you for that. Julie.
Hello.
Julie Baker is the Executive Director of Californians for the Arts and California Arts Advocates. Julie has been invited to the panel for a couple of reasons. Firstly, because she has very quickly become one of the country's best respected arts advocates, working at the state of California level, but also nationally. But very importantly, the pandemic during the pandemic, we witnessed swift federal and state response. And with that came new advocacy alliances that has brought hundreds of millions of dollars to creative industries. At the forefront of much of this work was Julie Baker, who was working to, yes, Julie, who was working to bring the important resources to the citizens of California. Julie, talk a little bit about how advocacy has changed, and in particular the alliances that had to be built.
Well, I'm so glad what I wrote is going to answer your question. So thank you for the opportunity to participate today. It is a great honor to present alongside such esteemed colleagues, and a special thank you to West staff. You know, they're such a tremendous leader in supporting not only the arts and culture sector, but I have to give a special shout out because they're leading in policy development and support for state advocacy organizations, which is really important, self-serving comment, but I'm going to say it's true. And so, yeah, my name is Julie Baker, and my pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm speaking today from the unceded territory of the Nevada City Rancheria Nisenan, or a town now known as Nevada City, California. I'm the Executive Director of California's statewide advocacy organizations for the arts, culture, and creative industries. We operate both a C4 that directly lobbies the legislature and state administration to prioritize, fund, and develop legislation to support arts and culture workers and businesses, and a C3, a nonprofit that works as a service organization to the industry to provide the tools and resources to build public awareness around the value and impact of our industry, why specifically we should be publicly funded, and how to access said funding. In terms of policy development and advocacy, Jonathan, this last 18 months have been a game changer. As the old adage goes, you don't miss something until it is gone, so it has gone for our industry. While for decades we, the sector and advocates, have been developing data and case studies to prove our economic and social impact and defining the term creative economy, thanks to people like Edna, never before did it hit home to all manner of policymakers, local, state, and federal, as well as to the workers within our own field, that we are truly essential to the fabric of every community and should be supported with public policy and funding to employ and lift up artists and creative workers. We also learned that our sector is deeply fragile, and the workers who make our sector viable are some of our most vulnerable workforce. In addition, we saw the impact fall most greatly on Black, Indigenous, and people of color-led and serving organizations, an issue that has been known but now prioritized, and we're beginning to see new policies and funding to support racial and cultural equity. This has been a galvanizing moment for our industry, and I use the word industry because I strongly believe that is how we must present ourselves. As my colleague Crystal Young Otterstrom from Utah coined, quote, we are an industry, not a cause. In this last year at California Arts Advocates, we worked across the industry to build a coalition to fight together for historic funding, as Jonathan mentioned. This was the first time in California for-profit and nonprofits worked side by side for public funding, as every aspect of business and workers that make up our industry were impacted by COVID. With our colleagues at National Independent Venues Association of California and California Association of Museums, we asked for $1 billion to be invested in the recovery of the arts, culture, and creative industries over the next 3 years. We produced surveys to show the impact, held legislative hearings to educate our policymakers on how our industry works, spent months in one-on-one meetings with legislators and the administration, organized advocates and letter campaigns and lobby days, and in the end, over $600 million was invested back into the recovery of our industry. We also have the first creative workforce development bill of its kind on our governor's desk for signature, and the California Creative Workforce Act of 2021, authored by Senator Ben Allen and sponsored by our organization, asks the state to prioritize the creative workforce and to develop a grants program to build opportunities for people historically underrepresented in the industry with earn and learn jobs with a living wage. It is crazy to think that the creative industries are not represented in our workforce development strategies, but we hope this is now changing. When policymakers move from seeing the creative sector as something nice to have, but non-essential, that fundamentally they don't understand how it works, but like to attend concerts and theater shows, that's kind of how, you start off when you meet with a policymaker, they're like, I love going, right? They fundamentally don't understand our industry. Once they start to understand that we are, arts and culture workers are $5.1 million strong labor force in the United States, contributes $919 billion in value add to the nation's economy, more GDP than construction and tourism, more than agriculture and mining combined, $265 billion more than transportation, and 3 times more to our GDP than education, industries that are regularly made legislative priorities, our sector should be too. We must create these systems to build and support this labor force, and we can start to see some fundamental changes. We must be integrated, not separated, and see ourselves in multiple buckets of funding opportunities, and not just ones for the art. We are small business, we are tourism, we are jobs, we are public and mental health, we are transportation, we are education, we are recidivism and prevention strategies, we are veterans affairs, we are social justice, we are economic and community development. Finally, for our own organization, we developed a messaging campaign around artists or second responders. And I recently received a copy of this welcome address to freshman parents at Boston Conservatory, given by Carl Polnack, a pianist and director of music division at Ithaca College, that I thought I would share. Quote, if we were a medical school and you were here as a med student practicing appendectomies, you'd take your work very seriously because you would imagine that some night at 2 a.m. someone is going to waltz into your emergency and you're going to have to save their life. Well, my friends, someday at 8 p.m., someone is going to walk into your concert hall and bring you a mind that is confused, is overwhelmed, a soul that is weary. Whether they go out whole again will depend partly on how well you do your craft. You're not here to become an and you don't have to sell yourself. The truth is you don't have anything to sell. Being a musician isn't about dispensing a product like selling used Chevys. I'm not an entertainer, and I'm a lot closer to a paramedic, a firefighter, a rescue worker. You're here to become a sort of therapist for the human soul, a spiritual version of a chiropractor, physical therapist, someone who works with our insides to see if they can get things to line up, to see if we can come into harmony with ourselves and be healthy and happy and well, end quote. And so I hope we can create the policies to support these workers as we move forward from relief to recovery to a new paradigm of sustainability and prosperity for the creative workforce and industries. So thank you. I hope that answered some of your questions.
Julie, it did. Thank you so much. That actually encapsulated everything really nicely. So we have about 20 minutes. We made a pact among ourselves when we were speaking earlier that we wanted to make sure that there was plenty of conversation for you all, but also for comments and questions from the audience. So we are tracking the chat. But to tee it up, I thought I'd ask the group what policy changes need to take place immediately to ensure far greater economic justice for creative workers, and in particular BIPOC creatives, including more equitable access to creative and design education opportunities and greater access to capital. All of you have a stake in this. So I'm wondering your thoughts. Kim, would you like to take it?
I mean, so it's an interesting question. It's a big question, Jonathan. Thank you for calling on first. But I think that the main one thing that always comes to mind for me is, you know, kind of building upon what Julie said, right? Of, you know, how are we integrating these goals into all aspects of thinking through policy, be it, you know, COVID relief, be it tech policy, all these things. For me, it's always another thing that goes off in my mind is, well, also, how are we going to ensure and build in from the very beginning ways that we're being very intentional about reaching our creators from marginalized communities, right? Because if you can imagine, you know, policy as it's going out the door, you know, we creators of color, we operate at the intersection of two communities that often slip through the cracks when policy is being thought of. So even when you think about the COVID relief bill that came out, and I just think that this is an example of, you know, policymakers really caring about creators, but at the same time, just so many gaps, right? So for example, and to be eligible for relief, we have to have, you know, vendors and have to be able to demonstrate that there's a certain number of employees and all of these requisites in order for you to be able to tap into this. Where our creators, their businesses are not built that way, right? And then you think about the challenges that under-resourced communities are already facing. So when you're asking for them to have pre-existing relationships with banking institutions, just a lot of things that disparately impact these communities that are operating at the intersection of being both creative and marginalized, you know, you often miss the ball. And so if we start thinking and centering our policy and thinking of the most vulnerable first, right, and then building it out that way, I just feel like we'll be able to reach and protect and support much more creators.
I can jump in on a little bit on, I think on the this holistic approach, which I completely agree with that's been mentioned a couple different times here, that things like policies that are really critical to our emerging creators. There was one, the SB 62 around the garment industry recently. And it was the first time I had seen a petition around all of the art and design schools, the other universities outside of art and design, getting on board with a petition to support the garment industry. Well, that falls back into educating our next generation. They need to realize that they're part of the system. In order for them to make all of these great products or really develop their ideas, somebody has to make them. And we need to make sure that the makers or the creators it's fair and equitable, and that we're taking care of each other as a creative community.
Mhm.
John, and I'm sorry. Just quickly, I would add that I think, if you look actually at the workforce development bill that we have, SB 628 here in California, one of the first things it tries to socialize, and I think language, which we talked about, is so important, is that our creative workers, our artists, are a workforce, that they are labor, that this is work that should be valued and prioritized by our policymakers. So that's first and foremost. And then, you kind of have to get to that first, centering artists. And then to me, it's also then the recognition and the prioritization of who has not been able to access these services or the education or the opportunity to be a part of that workforce. Or if they have not been getting the resource allocation to be able to lift up their own communities through the creative sector. So I think if we can do both in policy, and hopefully we've started in our little bill, and there'll be hopefully lots of others out there that will continue to develop that language, but we at least need to get our policymakers recognizing that this is actually a deliberate workforce that has an incredible amount to give to all aspects of our developing society.
I just would like to add that I think a creative economy policy to really be effective, you really needed this kind of a concerted and cross-cutting approach, because you have to involve all different segments, because a creative economy policy is much more than cultural policy. Cultural policy is one element, but you have to bring in economic development, regional growth, urban and national planning, social affairs, industry, labor, because we are talking about employment, we are talking about youth, we are talking about education. So if you don't really have what we call the integrated approach, and a kind of interministerial or interdepartmental, will be very difficult. I should say that when we start to look into the creative economy through the UN perspective, we wanted to see, we started looking to consider as a feasible development option. And why? Because we think that any strategy should be realistic, should be feasible, should be based on local realities. We have to have an assessment, identify priorities, see where are the weaknesses, where are the strengths, and then try to do something. There is not a one-size-fits-all approach, because things has to be tailor-made. And what, in my view, it's very important is because we need, particularly if you want to look into the imbalances and social aspects and social justice, we need a participatory approach. It's not something that is imposed from top down. It's not only coming up from bottom up, but we have to meet in the middle and try to bring it together. And you need to attract not only governmental, should be put in place the institutions that are required, should offer the infrastructure that are required, and to make clear to the private sector that the creative economy is a big business, because we needed to bring them into this conversation. So it's not only policies, not only private sector, but we really needed to sit together to bring the civil society, to bring academia, to bring communities. And that is what we think that it's not also, we need a shared vision, and we need a long-term approach, because it's not something that will be dealt with just in terms of one government that is there for 2 years, 4 years. It's something that you really should have a continuity. So should be a very clear purpose. And I think we need those policies. And I think for a very long time, the economic impact of the creative economy has been overlooked by governments. But I think that is over, because now it's very clear, the economic impact, because now we have figures, we have information. So that discussion is no longer valid, because we are in a new moment and a new narrative. So that is why we have to rethink all this. But I think the momentum now, it's much more favorable than it was in the past. And I think also now we have better tools, because I think governments, they know that we have to work closely. And how can you really encourage creativity and innovation if you don't change the educational system? No? As Karen has mentioned, it's very important to reframe the whole education system, the role of universities, and not only universities. I think education from the very beginning, from the kindergarten up to, and because we are nowadays, our learning doesn't finish when we end the university, because we need continuous learning, because we have to update our things every moment to respond. So I think that to be responsive, there is a role to be played by governments, by civil society, by the private sector, and by the institutions. And we need the institutions in place to facilitate this process.
I think, I give a personal example. In my two sons' high school, we used to have a craft fair every year, at least 2 times, 3 times. In the last 10 years, I'm seeing that there's more focus on the 8th grader is learning Pascal and C programming rather than taking some other fine arts kind of stuff. So I think the education policy should encourage students to take non-technology related, especially in California. Everybody wants to be a software engineer or AI, and cloud, and all this stuff. I mean, I'm an engineer myself, but that apart, we should encourage these. I still remember when they decided to drop music, we all took those issues as parents. We collected some 3,000 signatures to the governor. The then governor at that time was Arnold Schwarzenegger, to say that we need to save the teacher's position. It's very easy to remove these, and then the city also should provide both the space as well as funding for people to have the art festival in the prime location where people are coming, so that the habit of buying, the habit of encouraging, that's what is all about in culture. But now it has become almost an exclusive club. The mainstream people go to the malls, and people who are not normal, the guys who are going to these art centers. That kind of feeling should be changed. That can change by policies, and very clever policies, both in terms of facilitating. I talked earlier also about, if you're a small designer, doing some craft or jewelry or something, you will not get any bank finance. They will ask you how many people, when were you established, when were you born, where were you born. All these questions will be asked by the banking system. I think there must be some sort of a microfinance that will allow artisans and the craft people to sustain the trade and also bring joy to people, at the same time bring some creative economy for the cities where they live.
Srini, thank you. We've got about 7 minutes left, and a lot has been covered. I'm going to use the opportunity as a municipal bureaucrat to solicit your advice. If there's one thing that you want local governments to do post-pandemic in response to creatives and creative industries, what would you offer up as that important thing, that first thing to do?
I would say finance is very critical, because once you give them the finance, they could go get education, they could get business, they could start everything. I think fundamentally finance is the top priority for the struggling artisans. That's the only way to encourage, in my opinion, if I had to pick one.
Karen, you're thinking.
Sorry.
There's a lot there. Yeah. I think, I kind of mentioned this, this idea of connecting networks. I think that there are those that have definitive skills, those that have privilege, those that have already a trajectory, whether they're an independent artist or designer or whether they're a large organization. I think there needs to be an interconnectivity and a commitment to bringing everyone along. There are a few celebrities in the area that I live in that do that, but it's not enough, and that have really turn their attention to education, but in certain areas of Southern California that need that infusion and that aspiration and that, quite frankly, the pathway. We need to create pathways. We're terrible at it right now. And that is, I think, as Edna said too, this is, an interconnectedness among all of our different sectors in order to really see change.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Edna.
No, go, please.
I would just say that I feel like one thing that I would encourage state actors to do is that even as we enact and move forward with policy solutions, is to get really creative and intentional in its implementation, and to think about who it is that we are reaching, who we are not, and why. Think about the diversity of the actors and the networks that we're already working within, and constantly be doing an audit in who it is that we're reaching and why these certain groups look the way that they do, and ensure that they're as diverse as possible.
I think governments would be very important to ensure digital infrastructure. And I think that, when we see what happened during the pandemic, we could see that if the people don't have digital infrastructure, if they are not have support for training and to develop digital capabilities, they will be lagging behind. And I say so, not in particular in the case of the United States, but I say so in general, in particular for developing countries. I think this is very, very important, because nowadays it's very difficult to stimulate creativity and innovation if you cannot really access digital tools, and to have a broadband in an accessible manner that is affordable. It is affordable for small communities. We could see that even during the pandemic, it's very important to be in home office, but for those who have the home and for those who have an office. And otherwise, what means home office if you cannot work from home? So I think digital infrastructure, it's really the responsibility of governments. And if I may say so, I would add a second thing that I think it's all the responsibility of governments. It's really to review the regulatory framework. Because if we don't look into what is the real situation today when you talk about intellectual property, earlier today, we were discussing the music industry. And we see that is a sector that was very innovative. But this discussion of free practice, free use of we have to see that the creators have to survive from their work. And for this, policy should be in place to ensure that the creatives can live from their work. They can have a just remuneration. And I think this is all a role of governments to play, to review the whole regulatory framework for intellectual property, for competition policies, for fiscal schemes. So I think these are the two points that I would add.
And I'll say yes and to all of the above. And then, I was actually on a call earlier this morning, and the folks from Art Train were on it. And if you're not familiar with them, they're doing some great work. And I think it was June Lee from that organization said to see artists as assets. And I think, we need to, I would hope that local governments also, local government would think about putting artists and creative workers at the center of the recovery. I don't think we have a once in a generation challenge, as Edna said, but I think we have a once in a generation opportunity right now. I think that there's actually more attention being paid to our who we are. Oh, there goes my dog. And what we can offer than ever before. And I think we need to capitalize on that. And I hope that local government, having missed us for 18 months, will recognize that we are desperately needed inside of every aspect of how we can create a better society. And I think that look at us as part of the solution, not as somebody walking in and saying we need more money for the arts, but actually we are an integral piece to actually make this recovery and sustainable, better world. Let's just make it a better world.
Julie, thank you. Thank you, colleagues. I wish we could spend 30 more minutes talking about this. Your thoughts have really been provoking, and we appreciate your time. I want to give a shout out to West Staff again for hosting this gathering at the summit over the last 2 days. Congratulations on everything that you're doing over the last 18 months, changing the world. Thank you for being with us.